Washington minus Michael T. Flynn, the former National Security Advisor, was explicitly told in 2014 to seek approval. Any payments he accepted from a foreign government. Documents released on Thursday show. But a year later, he was paid $45,000 by a Kremlin-backed news organization to give a speech in Moscow. An arrangement lawmakers say he failed to disclose the next month when he submitted paperwork to renew his security clearance. The disclosure on Thursday also included a letter showing the Defense Department's Inspector General opened an investigation this spring into whether Mr. Flynn failed to properly report a payment from a foreign government. As a retired military intelligence officer, Mr. Flynn was required to vet all foreign payments with the Pentagon and the State Department, according to an October 2014 letter, was released as lawmakers investigate allegations of ties between President Trump's associates and the Russian government. The April 11 letter from the Inspector General did not specify what payment from a foreign government was at issue, but Mr. Flynn is known to have been paid more than $45,000 by RT, the Kremlin-financed news network, to give a speech in Moscow in December 2015. More than 2 months after Mr. Flynn was fired as National Security Advisor, his links to Moscow continue to bedevil the Trump administration, which itself has been dogged by reports of ties between Russian officials and the president's associates. The Senate and House Intelligence Committees and the FBI are investigating allegations that Mr. Trump's associates colluded with Russia before and after last year's presidential election. Mr. Flynn, an unconventional and often contentious former 3-star Army general, is at the center of the inquiries. Apart from the paid speech in Moscow, a trip during which he was photographed dining at the elbow of President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia, there are questions about conversations he had last year with the Russian ambassador to the United States. He was fired for misleading Vice President Mike Pence and other top officials about those conversations. It is not clear whether Mr. Flynn is cooperating with any of the investigations, but last month, he offered to sit down with congressional investigators in exchange for immunity, a deal that lawmakers say was declined, at least for now. The White House has so far declined requests from both congressional Republicans and Democrats to provide the House Oversight Committee with internal documents related to Mr. Flynn. White House officials argued that they did not have all the documents, and that those they did have were too sensitive and were irrelevant to congressional investigators. I honestly don't understand why the White House is covering up Michael Flynn, Representative Elijah E. Cummings of Maryland, the top Democrat on the House panel, said at a news conference on Thursday. Mr. Cummings released both the Pentagon Inspector General's letter to the committee and the October 2014 letter from the Pentagon instructing Mr. Flynn to seek approval before taking any payments from a foreign government. Democrats decided to release the documents on Thursday without approval from Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah, the committee's Republican chairman. According to a House aide, Mr. Cummings also chastised Mr. Chaffetz for his decision not to demand that Mr. Flynn appear before the committee for questioning, a move the chairman said was unnecessary, of a parallel investigation by the House Intelligence Committee. Mr. Chaffetz announced late Wednesday that he would be away from Washington for a few weeks. recovering from a medical emergency. Bruce Anderson, a spokesman for the Defense Department's Inspector General, said on Thursday that the office had opened its own investigation on April 4. In February, the New York Times reported that the Army was looking into whether Mr. Flynn had received money for his speech in Moscow around the time he left the Trump administration. Mr. Chaffetz and Mr. Cummings announced this week that it was likely that Mr. Flynn had violated federal law by failing to fully disclose his business dealings with Russia. They made assertion after viewing classified documents, included a form seeking to renew his security clearance in January 2016. Mr. Cummings also distributed an unclassified version of a document had prompted his joint announcement with Mr. Chaffetz, a letter dated April 7 from the Defense Intelligence Agency informing lawmakers that Mr. Flynn neither sought approval nor reported income from a foreign source. That letter, Mr. Cummings said, contradicts a claim by Mr. Flynn's lawyer that the general consulted with the agency about his trip to Moscow. The lawyer, Robert Kellner, said on Thursday that a partly redacted section of the April 7 letter confirmed that Mr. Flynn had given the DIA information about his speech in Moscow. That section of the letter refers briefly to information Mr. Flynn provided to Pentagon officials on a thumb drive, but does not appear to challenge the agency's findings that Mr. Flynn did not report receiving money from the Russian government. According to the Defense Department letter cautioning Mr. Flynn to seek permission before accepting payments from foreign governments, the penalty for failing to do so is the suspension of one's military retirement pay. The penalty for knowingly falsifying or concealing information on the form Mr. Flynn filled out to renew his security clearance, apparently without disclosing his speaking fee from RT, is fines and up to 5 years in prison. The latest development fueled questions about how thoroughly the Trump administration had vetted Mr. Flynn before he was named National Security Advisor. Sean Spicer, the White House spokesman, sought on Thursday to deflect blame to the Obama administration, claiming that officials had full knowledge of Mr. Flynn's trip to Moscow when his security clearance was issued. That directly contradicted the DIA, which said it had no record of Mr. Flynn's reporting details of his compensation there. Mr. Flynn's most recent clearance was issued last year, when President Barack Obama was still in office. But security clearances are issued by the Defense Department, not the White House, and are not subject to direct political oversight. After being forced out of the Trump administration, Mr. Flynn belatedly filed paperwork as a foreign agent. His work lobbying on behalf of Turkey's interests in the United States. He had been hired by a firm owned by a Turkish-American businessman with ties to the Turkish government. The firm paid him more than $500,000.